Daniel examined the chains first. They were thick and well-made. Each cuff locked around Claire's wrists with what looked like a biometric scanner. A small panel with symbols he could not read glowed faintly on each lock. He tried pulling on them, but they were solid. The chains themselves were anchored to the heavy iron stove with welds that would not break without serious tools. Claire gasped and clutched her swollen belly as another contraction hit. Daniel could see the pain written across her face. Sweat beaded on her silver skin despite the cold outside. Her breathing came in short, rapid bursts. The translation device on his multi-tool continued working, and he could hear her words now. She told him between contractions that the slavers were Kalari like her, traders who sold their own people for profit. They had attacked her colony transport and taken several prisoners. Claire was pregnant at the time. The slavers realized they could get more money for a baby than for an adult. Kalari children were rare and valuable on certain markets. They brought her to this planet, which was far from any trade routes or patrol zones. The cabin belonged to them. They used it as a stopping point for their illegal operations. They chained her up and left her with minimal supplies, just enough food and water to keep her alive until the birth. Then they would return to take the child and dispose of her. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He had heard stories about slavers in the outer systems, but had never encountered them directly. The practice was illegal in every civilized sector of space. Both human and alien governments had agreements to stop it, but laws meant nothing in regions where no one could enforce them. Another contraction came. This one lasted longer, and Claire cried out. Daniel could see the fear in her eyes now. Not just fear of the slavers, but fear of dying here. Fear that her baby would be taken. Fear that she would never see her home again. He spoke to her in a calm voice. The translator converted his words into her language. He told her his name, told her he would help, told her he would not let anything happen to her or her baby. He did not know if he could keep those promises, but he would try. Claire looked at him with something like hope. She asked if he was human. Daniel nodded. She said she had heard of his people, heard they were newcomers to the galactic community, heard they were stubborn and did not give up easily. She needed that stubbornness now. Daniel turned his attention back to the locks. The biometric scanners were the key. They would be programmed to recognize Kalari physiology, probably the slavers' own biosignatures. That meant he could not just force them open. He needed to trick the system. He pulled out his plasma cutter. It was meant for cutting through rock samples, but it could burn through metal if used carefully. The problem was the locks were close to Claire's skin. If he cut wrong, he could hurt her. And the chains were thick enough that cutting through them would take time they might not have. Then Daniel noticed something. The locks had power sources. Tiny energy cells that ran the scanners and the locking mechanisms. If he could short-circuit the power, the locks might release automatically as a safety feature. Most restraint systems were designed that way to prevent accidents. He examined the lock on Claire's right wrist more closely. The symbols on the panel were alien, but the basic design followed logic he understood. Power in processor lock mechanism. He used the multi-tool to access the back of the scanner panel. It took some careful prying, but he got it open. Inside were circuit boards and wiring that looked similar to human technology. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Energy cells were energy cells regardless of who made them, and circuits followed certain universal principles. Daniel began tracing the power flow with his eyes. Claire had another contraction. She grabbed his arm with her free hand and squeezed hard. Even weakened by days of captivity, her strength was impressive. Daniel waited until the contraction passed. Then he went back to work on the lock. He used the plasma cutter on its lowest setting, just a thin beam of heat. He carefully burned through one of the circuit connections. The panel flickered. Then the lock clicked open. Claire's right hand was free. She sobbed with relief. Daniel moved quickly to the other wrist. Now that he knew what to do, it went faster. Another careful cut and the second lock opened. The chains fell away from her wrists. Claire rubbed the raw skin where the cuffs had chafed, but she could not stand. She tried, but her legs would not support her. Days of being chained in one position had weakened her muscles. And the contractions were coming faster now. Daniel could see the baby moving inside her. This was happening whether they were ready or not. He looked around the cabin for anything useful. There were blankets in a corner, some basic supplies on shelves, water in a container by the wall, medical supplies in a small box. The slavers had left her with the bare minimum to keep her alive until they returned. Daniel grabbed the blankets and spread them on the cleanest part of the floor near the stove. The fire provided heat and light. He helped Claire move onto the blankets. She was heavy and awkward to move, but together they managed it. She lay back on the blankets, breathing hard. The contractions were coming every few minutes now. Daniel washed his hands in the water container. He had no gloves, no sterile equipment, nothing like a proper medical facility. Just him and a woman about to give birth in a cabin in the middle of nowhere during a storm. He thought about everything he had ever learned in emergency training. It was not much. Basic first aid. How to treat shock. How to stop bleeding. There had been one module on emergency births, but that was years ago, and he only half remembered it. Something about supporting the head, clearing the airways, keeping everything as clean as possible. Claire looked at him with trust in her eyes. She had no choice but to trust him. There was no one else. Daniel took a deep breath and nodded to her. He could do this. Humans had been delivering babies for thousands of years before modern medicine existed. If his ancestors could do it, then so could he. He just hoped the baby came soon because he had no idea how long the storm would last. And no idea when the slavers would return. Daniel Carter gripped the controls of his shuttle as the electromagnetic storm tore through the sky around him. The small survey vessel shook violently and every warning light on the dashboard flashed red. He had been charting mineral deposits on the outer rim of explored space when the storm appeared from nowhere. One moment the scanner showed clear skies, and the next moment his entire system went dark. The shuttle dropped like a stone. Daniel fought with the manual controls, but the magnetic interference had fried most of his systems. Through the viewport, he could see the planet's surface rushing up to meet him. It was supposed to be uninhabited according to all the charts, a barren rock with no atmosphere worth mentioning. But the readings had been wrong because he could see clouds and what looked like vegetation below. Impact came hard and fast. The shuttle hit the ground and skidded across rough terrain. Metal screamed and tore. Daniel's head smacked against the side panel despite the harness holding him in place. Then everything stopped moving. For a long moment he just sat there, breathing hard and checking to see if he was still alive. His left arm hurt and blood ran down from a cut above his eyebrow, but he could move everything and nothing felt broken. That was good. He tried the communication system but got only static. The distress beacon was completely dead. The navigation computer showed nothing but error messages. He was alone on an unknown planet with no way to call for help. Daniel released his harness and grabbed his emergency pack from the storage compartment. Inside was a basic medical kit, a plasma cutter that could work as a weapon, a multi-tool, some ration bars, and a thermal blanket. Not much, but it would have to do. He sealed his jacket against the cold and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him immediately. It howled across the landscape, carrying rain that felt like needles against his face. The sky was a mass of dark clouds lit from within by constant lightning. Thunder rolled across the hills. Daniel could barely see 20 meters in front of him. The shuttle behind him was a wreck. No chance of repairing it without parts and tools he did not have. He needed shelter. The temperature was dropping fast and his jacket could only do so much. Daniel picked a direction that looked like it might lead to lower ground and started walking. The terrain was rough with sharp rocks jutting up from the soil. Strange plants grew in twisted shapes and some of them glowed with a faint blue light. They pulsed in rhythm like they were breathing. Time lost meaning as he trudged through the storm. His boots slipped on wet stones. Rain soaked through his jacket. The cut on his head kept bleeding and he had to wipe his eyes every few steps. Daniel began to wonder if he would die out here. Exposure would kill him long before he starved. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Then he saw light ahead. Just a faint glow through the rain, but it was definitely artificial. Daniel changed direction and pushed toward it. His legs burned with exhaustion, but hope gave him new energy. As he got closer, he could make out a structure. A cabin made of stone and some kind of dark material that looked like hardened tree sap or resin. It was small and primitive, but it was shelter. Smoke came from a crude chimney. That meant heat. Daniel stumbled up to the door, which was made of thick wood bound with metal strips. He did not bother knocking. He just pushed it open and fell inside. The warmth hit him first. Then his eyes adjusted to the firelight. The cabin was one room with a dirt floor. An iron stove sat in the center with a fire burning inside it. Tools hung on the walls. Dried plants dangled from the ceiling beams. It looked like someone's home or maybe a hunting shelter. Then Daniel saw her and his blood turned cold despite the heat. A woman was chained to the stove. Heavy metal chains ran from thick cuffs on her wrists to the iron legs of the stove. She lay on the floor on her side. Her face was twisted in pain and she was clearly pregnant. Very pregnant. And she was not human. Her skin had a silvery sheen that caught the firelight. Her eyes were too large and shaped differently. Her ears came to slight points. But she was humanoid enough that Daniel recognized the expression on her face. Terror and pain. She looked at him with those large eyes and tried to speak, but another contraction hit her and she cried out instead. Daniel dropped his pack and moved toward her. He could see now that she was in active labor. Her water had broken already and soaked the blankets beneath her. The chains kept her from moving more than a meter from the stove. Someone had locked her here deliberately, left her to give birth alone and restrained like an animal. Anger flooded through Daniel. He did not know who this woman was or what species she belonged to, but he knew wrong when he saw it. No one deserved this. He knelt beside her and held up his hands to show he meant no harm. She looked at him with desperation in her eyes. Words came out in a language he did not understand. Daniel pulled out his multi-tool and found the translation device built into it. The small AI took a moment to process her speech patterns. Then it began translating. Her name was Claire. She was Kalari. She had been taken by slavers 3 months ago. They wanted her baby to sell on the black market. They left her here chained up to wait for the birth. They would return for the child. She had been alone for 2 days. The baby was coming now and she needed help. Daniel looked at the chains and then at Claire. He was a surveyor, not a doctor. He knew rocks and soil and mineral deposits. He had basic first aid training but nothing about delivering babies. But he was also human, and humans did not walk away from people who needed help. He met her eyes and nodded. Then he got to work. Daniel knelt beside Claire and tried to remember everything from that training module. Keep the mother calm. Monitor the contractions. Watch for signs of complications. Support the baby's head during delivery. Do not pull. Let nature do the work. Keep everything as clean as possible. He spoke to Claire in a steady voice. Asked her questions to keep her focused. How long had the contractions been happening? Had her water broken long ago? Was this her first child? The translator converted his words and her answers flowed back. This was her second child. She had a son back home on the colony world, 5 years old. She had not seen him in 3 months. The slavers took her while she was traveling between sectors for work. Her husband was waiting for her. He would not know what happened, would not know where to look. Daniel could hear the pain in her voice that had nothing to do with the contractions. The pain of a mother separated from her child. The pain of knowing she might never see her family again. He promised her again that he would help, that she would see her son, that this baby would grow up safe. Another contraction came and Claire gripped his hand. Her nails dug into his skin, but he did not pull away. He counted the seconds. 30 seconds of intense pain. Then it faded and she could breathe again. The contractions were getting longer and closer together. The baby was coming soon. Daniel checked the medical supplies the slavers had left. There was basic wound care material, bandages and antiseptic, some kind of painkiller in a bottle with alien symbols, a few tools that might be surgical instruments, and a small device that looked like a scanner or monitor. He picked up the scanner device and examined it. After a moment of fiddling, he figured out how to turn it on. When he held it near Claire's belly, it displayed what looked like vital signs. Her heart rate. The baby's heart rate. Some other readings he did not understand. But both heart rates looked strong and steady. That was good. Claire asked for water. Daniel helped her drink from a cup. She was sweating heavily now. Her silver skin glistened in the firelight. He used a damp cloth to wipe her face. She thanked him with her eyes. Words were getting harder as the pain intensified. He talked to her about anything he could think of to keep her distracted between contractions. He told her about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests, about cities with millions of people, about humanity's push into space over the last 2 centuries, about his job surveying planets for valuable minerals. Claire told him about her world, about cities built into cliffs overlooking silver seas, about how her people valued honor and family above all else, about traditions that went back thousands of years, about art and music and the way children learned by listening to the stories of elders. Another contraction hit. This one was different. Claire cried out and said she felt pressure. She needed to push. Daniel's heart raced. This was it. The baby was coming now. He positioned himself where he could help. Told Claire to push when her body told her to push. She bore down with a sound that was half scream, half growl. Daniel could see the baby's head beginning to crown. Dark hair matted with fluid. He supported it gently with his hands. The skin was warm and slippery. He told Claire she was doing great. Told her to breathe. Told her to push again when ready. The next contraction came, and Claire pushed with everything she had. The baby's head emerged fully. Daniel carefully cleared the nose and mouth of fluid. Then he waited for the next contraction. The shoulders would be the tricky part. If they got stuck, it could be dangerous for both mother and baby. Claire pushed again. Daniel supported the baby's head and let the body rotate naturally. One shoulder came free, then the other. Then suddenly the entire baby slid out into his hands. It was tiny and covered in fluid and completely quiet. For a terrible moment, Daniel thought something was wrong. Then he remembered. Clear the airways. He used his finger to sweep the baby's mouth clear. Rubbed its back vigorously. Come on, he thought. Breathe, please breathe. The baby's mouth opened. A small cough. Then a wail that filled the cabin. Daniel felt relief flood through him. He wrapped the baby in his thermal blanket. It was a girl, small and perfect with silvery skin like her mother and a shock of dark hair on her head. He placed the baby on Claire's chest. She wrapped her arms around her daughter and wept. Daniel had to look away for a moment because his own eyes were burning. He had just helped deliver a baby. An alien baby on a planet he had crash-landed on during a storm. It felt surreal, but there was still work to do. The umbilical cord needed to be cut and tied. The afterbirth would come soon. Claire needed to be kept warm and monitored for bleeding. The baby needed to be cleaned and kept warm. Daniel focused on these tasks. He used tools from the medical kit to tie off and cut the cord. His hand shook, but he managed it. Claire delivered the afterbirth a few minutes later. Daniel checked to make sure it was complete. As far as he could tell, everything looked normal. He wrapped it in a blanket to dispose of later. Claire held her baby close and whispered to her in Kalari. The baby had stopped crying and was making small sounds. Her eyes were closed, but her tiny fists waved in the air. Daniel cleaned them both as best he could with water and cloth. Changed the blankets they were lying on. Made sure they were both warm and comfortable. He checked the scanner device again. Both heart rates were still strong. Claire's vital signs looked stable. The baby seemed healthy. They had made it through the delivery. Against all odds, they had actually done it. Claire looked up at Daniel with tears still on her face. She said something that the translator took a moment to process. Then he heard the words. She was naming the baby Hope. Because a human stranger had given her hope when she had none left. Because her daughter was born free instead of in chains. Because maybe they would both survive this after all. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He told her Hope was a perfect name. Then he sat back against the wall and allowed himself a moment to just breathe. His whole body ached. His hands were shaking from adrenaline. But he had done it. They had done it. Outside, the storm continued to rage. The wind howled and rain battered the cabin walls. But inside there was warmth and light. A mother held her newborn daughter. And a human stranger stood watch over them both. Daniel knew the danger was not over. The slavers would return. He had no weapons except his plasma cutter. He was injured and exhausted. But he would not let them take this baby. He would not let them hurt Claire. He had made a promise and he would keep it or die trying. That was what humans did. They kept their promises. They protected those who could not protect themselves. They fought when fighting was necessary, and they never gave up. Daniel checked his plasma cutter to make sure it still worked. Then he settled in to wait. The hours after the birth passed in a strange calm. Claire rested with Hope cradled against her chest. The baby nursed and slept and made small sounds that filled the cabin with life. Daniel kept the fire burning in the stove and watched over them both. He cleaned up the mess from the delivery as best he could, organized the supplies they had, checked the door to make sure it was secure. His own injuries throbbed, but he ignored them. The cut on his head had stopped bleeding. His arm was bruised but functional. He was exhausted, but sleep felt impossible. Every sound from outside made him tense. Every time the wind rattled the door, he expected slavers to burst through. Claire dozed on and off. Her body needed rest to recover from the birth. but she kept Hope close at all times. Her arms stayed wrapped protectively around the baby even in sleep. Daniel understood. She knew the danger they were in, knew that the men who chained her here would return. He asked her about the slavers. How many were there? What weapons did they carry? When would they likely come back? Claire answered between moments of rest. There were 3 of them. All Kalari males. They carried energy weapons, pistols that could burn through flesh and bone. They had said they would return in 3 days. She thought 2 days had already passed. That meant they could arrive at any time. Daniel looked around the cabin for anything he could use. The tools on the wall were mostly for woodworking or maintenance. A hammer, a saw, some kind of prying bar. Nothing that would be much use against energy weapons. But it was better than nothing. He took the prying bar down and tested its weight. It was solid metal and heavy. Could crack a skull if swung hard enough. He leaned it against the wall near the door where he could grab it quickly. The plasma cutter went into his belt. He had maybe 10 minutes of continuous cutting time left in its power cell. Not much, but better than his bare hands. Claire watched him prepare. She asked if he was going to fight them. 3 armed men against 1 injured human. The odds were not good. Daniel told her he did not have a choice. He would not let them take Hope. Would not let them hurt her. If that meant fighting, then he would fight. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something the translator rendered as a concept rather than direct words. The closest meaning was honor through action. Doing what was right even when it was hard. Even when it might cost everything. She said humans must value this concept as her people did. Daniel thought about that. He had never considered himself particularly brave or honorable. He was just a surveyor who happened to crash on the wrong planet at the wrong time. But maybe she was right. Maybe walking away had never really been an option. Not for him. Not for any human who saw someone in trouble and had the ability to help. Hope began to cry. A soft mewling sound that quickly grew louder. Claire shifted her position and tried to comfort the baby. Daniel asked if something was wrong. Claire shook her head. Just hungry again. Babies ate frequently in the first hours and days, especially after a difficult birth. It was normal. He brought her water and some of the ration bars from his pack. She needed to keep her strength up. Needed to eat and drink to produce milk for Hope. Claire ate gratefully. The ration bars were designed for humans, but she could digest them well enough. She said they tasted strange but not bad. They talked quietly while Hope nursed. Claire asked about Daniel's family. He told her about his parents back on Earth. His sister who worked as a teacher. His friends from the academy. People he had not seen in months because his survey work kept him traveling from system to system. He asked about her family. She spoke of her husband. His name was something the translator could not quite capture but rendered as something like Bright Finder. He worked with technology, designed systems for ships and stations. Their son was called Little Voice because he had been quiet as a baby, but now never stopped talking. Claire's eyes filled with tears as she described him. Dark hair like his father. Curious about everything. Always asking questions. Daniel promised again that she would see them both. That Hope would meet her brother and father. Claire wanted to believe him, but he could see the doubt in her eyes. She had been a prisoner for 3 months. Had given birth in chains. Hope was enough to make anyone lose faith. The storm outside began to fade. The wind died down to occasional gusts. The rain became intermittent. Through gaps in the clouds, Daniel could see stars, alien constellations he did not recognize. The electromagnetic interference might be clearing. If he could get to his shuttle, he might be able to rig a distress signal. But the shuttle was kilometers away, and he could not leave Claire and Hope alone. He checked his multi-tools communication function. Still nothing but static. The storm had damaged more than just his shuttle. The entire area seemed to be in some kind of dead zone, or maybe the planet itself interfered with signals. Either way, they were on their own. Hours passed. Claire slept more deeply now that her body was recovering. Hope slept in her arms, making small sleeping sounds. Daniel stayed awake and kept watch. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but he forced them to stay open. He sat by the door with the metal bar across his lap, and the plasma cutter in easy reach. The fire in the stove burned low. He added more fuel carefully and quietly. The cabin was small enough that the heat spread quickly. Outside he could hear night sounds. Creatures moving in the darkness. Nothing that sounded dangerous, but he stayed alert anyway. Dawn came slowly. Light crept through the gaps around the door and the small window. The storm had passed completely. Daniel could hear birds or something like birds calling to each other. A new day on an alien world. Under other circumstances, he might have found it beautiful. Then he heard something else. Voices in the distance. Coming closer. Speaking in a language his translator recognized as Kalari, Daniel's body went tense. He stood and moved to the window. Through the dirty glass, he could see 3 figures approaching the cabin. The slavers had returned. They walked casually like they had nothing to fear. Why would they? They expected to find one exhausted woman chained to a stove with a newborn baby. Instead, they were about to find a human who had spent the last few hours thinking about all the ways he could hurt them. Daniel checked his weapons one more time. The metal bar felt solid in his grip. The plasma cutter was hot and ready. His heart hammered in his chest, but his hands were steady. Fear was there, but so was anger. Cold hard anger at what these men had done, what they planned to do. He looked back at Claire. She was awake now. Her eyes were wide with fear. She held Hope close and pulled the blankets around them both. Daniel met her gaze and nodded once. Then he turned back to face the door. The voices were right outside now. He heard laughter. Heard one of them say something about getting paid. About how much a Kalari baby would bring on the market. About selling Claire's body for parts after they took the child. Daniel's grip tightened on the metal bar. The door began to open. Light spilled into the cabin. A figure stepped through the doorway, backlit by the morning sun. The slaver stopped when he saw Daniel standing there. His expression changed from confidence to confusion. Then Daniel moved and the fight began. Daniel worked on the communication device while Claire rested with Hope. The device was more complex than anything he had used before, but the basic principles were universal. Power source, transmitter, receiver, and controls. He just needed to figure out which frequencies to use and how to boost the signal. The slavers watched him from their corner. The one with the broken ribs kept making pained sounds. The one with the wounded arm had stopped bleeding but looked pale. The third one with the broken jaw could barely move his mouth. Daniel felt no sympathy for any of them. They had chained a pregnant woman to a stove. They deserved worse than what they got. He finally got the device working, set it to broadcast on multiple emergency frequencies, recorded a distress message in both human standard and Kalari, gave their location as best he could determine, said there were injured people who needed medical attention, and prisoners who needed to be taken into custody. Then he set it to repeat and broadcast continuously. Now they had to wait. Help could come in hours or days depending on who was listening and how far away they were. Daniel hoped it would be soon. Claire needed proper medical care. Hope needed to be checked by doctors. And he wanted these slavers off this planet and into a cell where they belonged. Claire asked him what would happen to the slavers. Daniel said they would be tried for kidnapping, slavery, and attempted child trafficking. All serious crimes in every civilized system. They would spend the rest of their lives in prison if there was any justice in the universe. Claire seemed satisfied with that answer. The hours passed slowly. Daniel kept watch, made sure the chains holding the slavers stayed secure, fed the fire in the stove to keep the cabin warm, brought Claire water and food, checked on Hope, who continued to sleep and nurse and make small baby sounds. Around midday, the communication device crackled. A voice came through speaking Kalari. Daniel grabbed the device and responded. The voice identified itself as a patrol ship from the Kalari Defense Fleet. They had received his distress call and were en route. Estimated arrival in 3 hours. Relief flooded through Daniel. He translated for Claire and she began to cry. Happy tears this time. They were going to be rescued. She would see her family again. Hope would grow up safe. Everything they had fought for was going to happen. But the slavers heard the message too. The one with the broken jaw said something that made the other two look at each other. Daniel could not understand the words, but he recognized the tone. They were planning something, trying to figure out a way to escape before the patrol ship arrived. He moved closer to them, made sure they could see the plasma cutter in his hand, told them not to even think about trying anything. They glared at him but stayed still. They knew he would use the weapon if he had to. Had already proven he would fight to protect Claire and Hope. Time crawled by. Daniel's exhaustion was catching up with him now that the immediate danger had passed. His eyes kept trying to close. His body wanted to collapse, but he could not rest yet. Not until help arrived. Not until he was sure Claire and Hope were safe. Claire seemed to sense his struggle. She told him to rest, that she would watch the prisoners. But Daniel shook his head. She had just given birth. Her body needed rest more than his. He could stay awake a few more hours. Could push through the exhaustion. They compromised. They would both stay awake. Would watch the slavers together. If one of them started to drift off, the other would keep alert. It was not perfect, but it would work. The slavers tried talking to each other in low voices. Planning something. Daniel told them to be quiet. When they ignored him, he fired the plasma cutter at the floor between them. Just a quick burst that burned a black mark into the wood. That got their attention. They went silent. The one with the wounded arm asked for medical attention. Said he was losing too much blood. Daniel looked at the wound. It had stopped bleeding and did not look infected. Painful but not life-threatening. He tossed the slaver a bandage from the medical kit and told him to wrap it himself. The Kalari glared but did as he was told. Outside, the sun moved across the sky. The alien birds, or whatever they were, kept calling to each other. Occasionally, Daniel heard larger creatures moving in the distance. He wondered what kind of wildlife lived on this planet. Wondered if any of it was dangerous. Hoped he would never have to find out. Claire talked to Hope in soft Kalari. Sang her songs. Told her stories. The baby was awake now and looking around with unfocused eyes. Too young to see clearly but aware of her mother's voice and warmth. Daniel watched them and felt something tight in his chest. This was what he had fought for. This simple moment of a mother with her child. The communication device crackled again. The patrol ship was closer now. They would arrive in less than an hour. They were bringing medical personnel and security officers. They wanted to know the situation. Daniel gave them a quick report. 3 prisoners secured. 1 human with minor injuries. 1 Kalari female and newborn, both in stable condition but needing medical evaluation. The voice acknowledged his report. Said they would be ready for immediate medical intervention on arrival. Asked him to confirm the number of hostiles and whether they were armed. Daniel confirmed the prisoners were disarmed and restrained. The voice thanked him and said they were coming in fast. The slavers heard this too. They knew their time was running out. The one with the broken jaw tried one last time to talk his way out. He said it had all been a misunderstanding. That they were just doing business. That humans had no right to interfere in Kalari affairs. Daniel cut him off. Told him he had lost the right to call it business when he chained a pregnant woman to a stove. That no civilized being would consider what they did anything but a crime. That they would answer for what they had done. The slaver went silent again. Then they heard it. A sound from above. Getting louder. The distinctive whine of a ship's engines. Daniel went to the window and looked up. He could see the patrol ship descending through the clouds. It was sleek and silver with markings he did not recognize, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ship landed in a clearing about 50 meters from the cabin. Its engines kicked up dust and vegetation. Then they powered down and a ramp extended from the side. Figures emerged. Some in medical uniforms, some in what looked like military armor. They moved with purpose toward the cabin. Daniel opened the door to meet them. The first person he saw was a Kalari female in medical whites. She saw Claire and Hope and immediately moved toward them. Started asking questions and doing examinations. Other medical personnel followed her in. Then came the security officers, armored and armed. They took one look at the chained slavers and moved to secure them. Asked Daniel what happened. He gave them a brief summary. They listened with expressions that grew harder as the story unfolded. One of the officers, an older Kalari male with scars on his face, looked at Daniel with something like respect. He asked if the human had really taken down 3 armed men by himself. Daniel started to say that Claire had helped, but the officer waved that off. Said a human surveyor had protected a Kalari mother and child from slavers. That was enough. The medical personnel were loading Claire and Hope onto a stretcher. Claire reached out and grabbed Daniel's hand. Squeezed it hard. Said something in Kalari that the translator rendered as eternal gratitude or perhaps life debt. Daniel squeezed back and told her she owed him nothing. That anyone would have done the same. But even as he said it, he knew it was not true. Not everyone would have stopped to help. Not everyone would have fought against impossible odds. Not everyone would have put themselves at risk for strangers. But that was what humans did. That was what made them human. The security officers were hauling the slavers out of the cabin. They were not gentle about it. The slavers tried to protest, but no one was listening. They were put into restraints and marched toward the ship. Daniel watched them go and felt satisfied. Justice would be served. One of the medical personnel approached Daniel, a young Kalari male who looked barely old enough for the job. He said the human needed treatment too, that the cuts and burns and bruises should be looked at. Daniel started to argue, but the medic was insistent. Finally, he agreed and let himself be led toward the ship. As they walked, he looked back at the cabin one last time, that small primitive structure where so much had happened, where a baby had been born, where a fight had been won, where a human had proven what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. Then he climbed the ramp into the patrol ship and left the cabin behind. The first slaver barely had time to react before Daniel swung the metal bar. It caught him across the jaw with a crack that echoed in the small space. The Kalari stumbled backward into his companions. Blood sprayed from his mouth. He dropped the energy pistol he had been carrying, and it clattered on the floor. The other two slavers pushed their injured companion aside. They were bigger than Daniel, taller by a head and broader in the shoulders. Their skin was the same silver tone as Claire's, but their faces were hard and cruel. Both drew weapons, energy pistols that hummed with power. Daniel dove to the side as the first shot went off. The energy bolt hit the wall behind where he had been standing. Wood and stone exploded into fragments. The heat from the shot made the air shimmer. If that had hit him, it would have burned straight through. He came up swinging the metal bar at the nearest slaver's weapon hand, connected hard, heard bones crack. The pistol flew from nerveless fingers and Daniel kicked it across the cabin. 2 weapons down, 1 to go. The third slaver aimed carefully, too carefully. He was trying not to hit his companions in the confined space. That hesitation gave Daniel the opening he needed. He grabbed the edge of the heavy iron stove and pulled. It was hot, and the heat seared his palms, but he ignored the pain. The stove tilted. Hot coals spilled across the floor. The slavers jumped back from the burning coals. Daniel used those seconds to activate his plasma cutter. The blue-white beam sprang to life. He slashed at the third slaver's gun arm. The plasma cut through fabric and flesh. The Kalari screamed and dropped his weapon. Now they were even. No guns on either side. Just 3 slavers against 1 human in close quarters. The slavers looked at each other. They were still bigger and stronger, still had the advantage of numbers. But their expressions had changed. The easy confidence was gone. Now they looked at Daniel like he might actually be dangerous. The first slaver, the one Daniel had hit in the jaw, pulled a knife from his belt. It was a wicked-looking thing with a curved blade. He said something in Kalari that the translator rendered as a threat about gutting humans. Daniel did not bother responding. He just adjusted his grip on the metal bar and waited. They came at him together, coordinated. One from the left with the knife, one from the right with his fists, the third hanging back to watch for an opening. Daniel blocked the knife strike with the metal bar. Sparks flew as metal scraped metal. He twisted and brought his elbow up into the second slaver's throat. The Kalari choked and stumbled back. Daniel pressed his advantage. He was smaller, but he was faster, and he fought with a desperation they could not match. This was not about money for him. This was about protecting a mother and her baby. That gave him an edge that no amount of strength could overcome. He swung the bar in a wide arc, caught the knife wielder in the ribs, heard something crack. The slaver went down gasping. Daniel spun and faced the other 2. His lungs burned. His injured arm throbbed. But he was not done yet. Behind him he heard Claire cry out. Not in pain, but in defiance. She had moved from her resting place, still weak from giving birth but too angry to stay down. She had grabbed the chains that had held her prisoner. Now she swung them like a weapon at the nearest slaver's legs. The heavy chains wrapped around his knees. He fell hard. His head bounced off the floor. Daniel was on him instantly. He pressed the plasma cutter against the back of the slaver's neck, did not activate it but made sure the Kalari could feel the heat. The slaver went very still. The third slaver looked around wildly. 2 of his companions were down. 1 unconscious. 1 curled around broken ribs. He himself had a wounded arm that dripped blood on the floor. And a human who should have been easy prey had turned the situation into a nightmare. He made a choice, turned and ran for the door, got 3 steps before Daniel threw the metal bar. It tumbled end over end and caught the slaver behind the knees. He went down in a tangle of limbs. Before he could rise, Daniel was on top of him, pressed the plasma cutter against his throat. The slaver froze. His eyes were wide with fear now. Daniel could smell it on him, could see the understanding dawning that he had made a terrible mistake. They all had. They had underestimated the human, had thought one lone surveyor would be no threat. Now 2 of them were injured and 1 was being held at plasma point. Daniel's hands shook with adrenaline, but his voice was steady when he spoke. He told the slaver to stay down, to not move, to not even breathe hard. The translator converted his words and the Kalari nodded frantically. He understood. Claire had managed to get to her feet. She swayed unsteadily but held hope against her chest with one arm. With the other, she grabbed one of the dropped energy pistols. Her hand shook, but she pointed it at the slavers with determination. She said something sharp in Kalari that made them all flinch. Daniel stood slowly, kept the plasma cutter pointed at the slaver on the floor. He looked around at the scene. The cabin was a disaster. Scorch marks on the walls from the energy bolts, scattered coals from the overturned stove, blood on the floor from various wounds. 3 armed men brought down by an injured surveyor and a woman who had given birth hours ago. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he just felt tired. His whole body ached. His burned palms throbbed. The cut on his head had started bleeding again. But they were alive. Claire and Hope were safe. The slavers were neutralized. That was what mattered. He told Claire to keep the gun trained on them while he secured the prisoners. She nodded and adjusted her grip. Her face was pale, and she looked ready to collapse, but her eyes were fierce. She would shoot if she had to. They both knew it. Daniel used the same chains that had held Claire to bind the slavers. He locked their wrists behind their backs and connected them all together. The biometric locks would not open for him, but that was fine. He did not plan to let them go. He made sure the chains were tight, made sure they could not reach their weapons or tools. The slaver with the broken ribs groaned but did not resist. The one with the wounded arm cursed but stayed still. The third one, the one Daniel had knocked unconscious with the first blow, was starting to come around. Daniel checked to make sure his jaw was not actually broken. It was not, but it would hurt for a long time. He collected all the weapons. 3 energy pistols and 2 knives. Put them in a pile far from the slavers. Then he helped Claire sit down again. She was shaking now that the danger had passed, adrenaline fading and leaving her weak. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and made sure Hope was still all right. The baby had somehow slept through the entire fight. She was still cradled safely against her mother's chest, still breathing softly, still completely unaware that her life had just been saved by violence. Daniel hoped she would never have to know, that she would grow up safe and never understand what almost happened here. He turned back to the slavers. They sat chained together, glaring at him with hatred and fear in their eyes. He glared back, asked them where their ship was, how they communicated with it. Whether they had backup coming, they refused to answer at first. Then Daniel held up the plasma cutter and asked again. The ship was parked 5 kilometers north. They had a communication device in the cabin somewhere. They were supposed to check in every 2 days but had not bothered. No one was coming to help them. They were on their own. Daniel found the communication device hidden in a storage box. It was a sophisticated unit with more range than his multi-tool. He could use this to call for help, to contact the nearest authorities, to get Claire and Hope to safety and make sure these slavers faced justice. But first he needed to make sure they could not escape. He dragged them all into a corner and used more chains to secure them to one of the support beams. They were not going anywhere, not without help they would never receive. Claire watched all this with Hope still in her arms. When Daniel was finished, she looked at him and said something that took the translator a moment to process. When it came through, he heard the words clearly. She called him Kalesh. The translator said it meant something like warrior honor or perhaps protector of the helpless, a concept her people held sacred. Daniel did not feel like he deserved such a title. He had just done what needed doing, what anyone would have done in his place, but he could see in Claire's eyes that she meant it. that to her people what he had done was worthy of the highest respect. He nodded his acceptance and she nodded back. Outside, the sun continued to rise. A new day on an alien world where 3 slavers had learned a hard lesson. Never underestimate a human protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The ceremony took place in a hall built into the cliffs overlooking one of Silvershore's silver seas. Daniel stood in formal clothes borrowed from the patrol ship's supplies. They did not fit perfectly, but they would do. Around him gathered hundreds of Kalari in their own formal wear, representatives from the government, military officers, citizens who had heard the story and wanted to see the human who saved one of their own. Claire and her family sat in the front row. Hope was wrapped in silver cloth that shimmered in the light. Little Voice sat on his father's lap trying to stay still but failing. He kept waving at Daniel. Daniel waved back and the boy grinned. The ceremony began with speeches. Government officials talked about the importance of interspecies cooperation. Military leaders discussed the ongoing fight against slavery and trafficking. Everyone seemed to have something to say. Daniel tried to pay attention but found his mind wandering. He thought about the cabin, about the storm, about Claire's face when Hope was born, about the slavers and the fight, about how close it all came to ending differently if he had not crashed on that planet, if he had not found the cabin, if he had chosen to wait out the storm in his shuttle instead of seeking shelter. Everything could have gone wrong in 1,000 different ways, but it had not. Somehow, against all odds, it had worked out. Claire and Hope were safe. The slavers were in custody, and he was standing in a formal hall about to receive an honor he did not think he deserved. Life was strange sometimes. Finally, it was Daniel's turn to speak. He stood at a podium that adjusted to his height, looked out at hundreds of silver-skinned faces watching him with respect and curiosity. He was not good at speeches, preferred rocks and soil to crowds and attention. But he would do his best. He talked about finding Claire, about how helping her had not been a choice but simply the right thing to do, about how any human would have done the same, about how humanity believed in protecting those who could not protect themselves, about how he hoped the friendship between humans and Kalari would continue to grow. It was not a great speech. He stumbled over some words, lost his place once, but the Kalari listened intently. When he finished, they stood and applauded. Not polite applause, but genuine appreciation. Daniel felt his face heat up. He was not used to this kind of attention. The highest government official present came forward. Her name translated roughly to Silver Speaker. She carried a small box made of the same material as the cabin's walls. Dark resin polished to a shine. She opened it to reveal a medallion on a silver chain. Silver Speaker spoke in formal Kalari, that the translator rendered carefully. She said Daniel was being awarded the Star of Kalesh, the highest civilian honor the Kalari people could give. It was rarely awarded to non-Kalari. He was only the 5th outsider ever to receive it, and the first human. She explained that Kalesh meant more than just honor or bravery. It meant doing what was right even when it cost everything. It meant protecting others without thought of reward. It meant standing firm against darkness. These were values the Kalari held sacred, and Daniel had embodied them all. She placed the medallion around his neck. It was heavy and warm against his chest. The star design caught the light and seemed to glow. Daniel touched it carefully, felt the weight of what it represented. He looked at Silver Speaker and thanked her. She bowed to him, a formal bow of deep respect. Then Claire came forward with Hope in her arms. She spoke through the translator, said that by Kalari tradition Daniel was now Hope's guardian, her protector across the stars. He would always be welcome in her home, would always be considered family, and Hope would grow up knowing the story of the human who saved her life. Daniel felt tears in his eyes. He looked at the tiny baby in Claire's arms. Hope was awake and looking around with unfocused eyes. He reached out and touched her small hand. She gripped his finger with surprising strength. He smiled and promised her silently that he would always be there if she needed him. The ceremony ended with a feast. Tables loaded with Kalari food and drink. Music played by instruments Daniel had never seen. Dancing and laughter and celebration. Daniel found himself swept up in it. People wanted to meet him, to shake his hand, to hear the story directly from him. He told it so many times he lost count. Brightfinder brought him a drink and sat with him when the crowd finally gave him a break. They talked about family, about work, about the strange paths life took sometimes. Brightfinder said he could never repay what Daniel had done. Daniel said there was nothing to repay, that seeing Claire and Hope safe with their family was payment enough, but Brightfinder insisted, said that Kalari took debts seriously, that Daniel had saved his wife and daughter. That made them connected forever. If Daniel ever needed anything, anywhere, at any time, he should call. The entire family would come running. It was the Kalari way. Daniel accepted gracefully, knew that refusing would be an insult. So he thanked Brightfinder and promised to stay in touch, promised to visit when he could, promised to watch Hope grow up. Brightfinder seemed satisfied with that. Later that night, Daniel stood on a balcony overlooking the Silver Sea. The ceremony was over. Most of the guests had left. He could hear the waves below and see the stars above. So many stars, so many worlds, so many people living their lives out there. Steel Voice found him there. The scarred officer had a drink in his hand and a thoughtful expression. He joined Daniel at the railing. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then Steel Voice spoke. He said word of what happened was spreading across the galaxy. Human and Kalari news networks were covering the story. Other species were taking notice. Humanity was being talked about in ways they had not been before. Not as the new species or the young race, but as people who could be counted on. People who helped. People who fought for what was right. Daniel said he hoped that was true. That humanity deserved that reputation. Steel Voice smiled and said they were earning it one action at a time. That every human who helped someone in need added to that reputation. That every act of kindness or bravery rippled outward in ways that could not be measured. He also said the 3 slavers had been transferred to a detention facility. Their trial would happen soon. The evidence was overwhelming. They would be convicted and sentenced to the prison planet. They would never hurt anyone again. Justice had been served. Daniel felt satisfied hearing that. Felt like the whole ordeal had reached a proper conclusion. The bad guys caught. The victims safe. The right people honored. It was as close to a happy ending as real life ever got. The next morning, Daniel prepared to leave. He had booked passage on a human transport ship heading back toward the inner systems. He needed to report to his company about the destroyed shuttle. Needed to get reassigned. Needed to get back to work. Claire and her family came to see him off at the spaceport. Hope was asleep in a carrier on Claire's chest. Little Voice hugged Daniel's legs and made him promise to come back soon. Daniel promised. Brightfinder shook his hand with both of his and thanked him one more time. Claire kissed his cheek and whispered words of gratitude. As Daniel walked toward his ship, he looked back one last time. Saw them standing there, a family made whole again, a baby who would grow up safe. A little boy who had his mother back. It made everything worth it. Every wound, every moment of fear, every risk taken, the transport ship left Silvershore behind. Daniel watched the planet shrink in the viewport, watched it become just another point of light among millions. But he knew he would come back someday, would watch Hope grow up, would be part of this family he had accidentally joined. Back on Earth, the story had become news. Daniel's family called him on the ship's communication system. His mother cried. His father said he was proud. His sister said she always knew he would do something amazing. They wanted to hear everything. So he told them. All of it. His company contacted him too, said he was being reassigned to less dangerous survey work, that they could not afford to lose him after he had become famous, that there would be media requests and interviews. Daniel groaned but accepted it. This was his life now, apparently. Weeks passed. Then months. Daniel did interviews, told the story over and over, explained what had happened, tried to downplay his role, but no one let him. He was the human who fought 3 armed slavers to protect an alien mother and child. That was the story, and it was not changing. He received messages from other humans who had helped aliens in various situations. They said his story inspired them, made them proud to be human, made them want to live up to humanity's growing reputation. Daniel found that humbling. He had not meant to inspire anyone. He had just done what needed doing. He also received messages from aliens, Kalari thanking him for helping one of their people, other species saying they had new respect for humans, requests for him to speak at various events, offers of honors and awards. He declined most of them, but some he accepted because it seemed rude not to. A year after the incident, Daniel visited Silvershore again. Hope had grown. She could hold her head up now and smile at faces. Little Voice insisted on showing Daniel everything in their house. Every toy, every drawing, every story he knew. It was exhausting but wonderful. Claire looked happy and healthy. The trauma of the kidnapping still lingered, but she was healing. She had started working with anti-slavery organizations,